Hi, anyone and everyone. Welcome to Have You Heard About This Case? My name is Sam.
And my name is Kelly.
Since we are doing part 2, and you have patiently waited a week to hear the conclusion of the Chai Sua Vang case, I think we're going to skip our intro question for this one so we can hop right into it. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode, I strongly recommend pausing here, going back and listening to it, because last episode we talked about the crimes of Chai Sua Vang, and this week we're going to talk about the trial.
And if I could just second Sam's recommendation here to listen to part 1, I would offer that because it gives you a lot of background into how we got here to this trial.
Yeah, there's a lot of like mini history lessons throughout it that become very relevant to everything. But just to give you a really brief recap, reminder, Chai Sua Vang was born in Laos in the late 60s. He was a Hmong refugee, and his family ended up in Minnesota. He had multiple violent encounters with ex-wives. He loved fishing, he loved hunting, but he also had multiple violations, and one of those was for trespassing while hunting. On December 21st, Vang accidentally trespassed onto private land after being approached, racially profiled, and threatened to be reported to the Department of Natural Resources, the DNR. He opened fire. He shot 8 people multiple times and fled the scene. One of his victims had the chance to radio the rest of their 15-person hunting party to ask for help while he was being shot down. By the time another unrelated hunter helped Vang get back to the road, authorities were there waiting to arrest Vang. So that's just an incredibly brief recap. But once the authorities got to the scene, they realized that there were 3 survivors.
Oh, yes.
Lauren Hesbeck, Terry Willers, and Denny Drew. Unfortunately, Denny Drew later died at the hospital.
Oh.
But Vang was immediately booked for the murders and the attempted murders. And the sheriff took note that Vang seemed very calm for what he had just done. He was arrested without incident, and he stayed silent. And his bail was set at $2.5 million.
Woo!
Which, for the area, is an absolutely insane bail amount. I'm pretty sure it set a record.
That's a lot of bail money. They do not want him getting out, which I think is smart because he seems to be very, very dangerous.
Yes. So I'd like to take a little bit of time to tell you about the lives of the victims. We didn't really do that in the last one because to understand the story, we really had to focus on Vang. But obviously, they deserve their own time. And unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of information. There wasn't really social media at this point. This was 2004. So
yeah, we haven't.
Amongst generations beyond their like teenage years, most people didn't have social media. So there's not a lot of information, but I still want to tell you the few things I've learned. Robert Bob Corrado was 42 at the time of his death, and he owned a concrete business in Rice Lake, which is about 30 miles from where the group was murdered in Meteor. Bob was married with 3 children. Joey Corrado, his son, was murdered at age 20. He was also his business partner in his concrete company.
Oh my gosh. Only 20 and
20.
And he had a wife and 2 other children. Ugh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
And this has shattered all these families, but
all of them, yeah.
His business partner.
This is such a small community that everyone knows everyone in a place like this. Yeah. And so it really just shattered the whole Rice Lake community, because you'll see most of these people are from Rice Lake.
Oh, sorry, go on. Yes.
Alan Lasky, who was 43, managed a lumber yard in Rice Lake. He was also married with 3 children. Mark Roy was 28. I couldn't find his occupation or if he had a family, but I know that he was invited on this hunting trip because Denny Drew invited him, just inviting a friend along.
Yeah.
And Denny
again,
Drew was
again so young.
Yes, exactly.
28.
Denny Drew was 55. He was a car salesman in Rice Lake. I don't believe he had a wife and kids, but I couldn't find that information. And then Jessica Willers, who was 27 when she was murdered. She was a nurse from Rice Lake who had recently moved to Green Bay. And so Green Bay is on the other side of the state from Rice Lake. So I make the assumption that she was probably home for the holidays, going out on a hunting group with her family. She was engaged and planning her wedding at the time of her death.
No. That's... If you guys, again, listen to the first episode, if you can, because particularly Jessica Willers, this poor 27-year-old girl, she suffered. And they all suffered, but that's so sad. That's so sad. She's a nurse.
Really is.
She's a nurse. She's just trying to help the community. 27 years old, about to get married.
It's rough.
I can definitely see how you mentioned that this could just shatter a community. This is so many lives that were lost.
Yeah.
This is so many lives that were lost.
Yeah, I didn't live in this area where this happens very specifically, but I grew up not far. And this was massive news. It affected so many people in all of northern Wisconsin. But then we also have our 2 survivors. Lauren Hesbeck, who was 48 at the time of the shooting, and he was a manager at a dealership in Rice Lake. I'm not sure this is the same dealership that Denny Drew worked at, but I kind of assume so, because Denny Drew was his brother-in-law.
Family.
And then finally we have Terry Willers, who was 47 at the time of the shooting. He was Jessica Willers' father.
No. Oh, wait, he survived.
And he survived. Unfortunately, his daughter did not.
That is so tragic.
And he worked for the Carato's concrete business.
Could you remind me, Sam, which of these folks' property he was on? Who owned the property?
It was Terry Willers and Bob Carato. So Terry Willers did survive as one of the owners.
They owned it jointly, and one of the... Okay, and one of the owners survived. All right.
Yes. So I don't think it'll come as any surprise to you to know that there are 2 sides to this story. The story I told you in the last episode was the version given from the hunting party, as told by Lauren Hesbeck and Terry Willers. Vang's story was that he was shot at first by Willers. Willers did have a gun on him, but no one else did. Vang says that he was defending himself and that the hunting party, and I believe very specifically Bob Carato, were yelling multiple offensive racial slurs at Vang and threatening him. Vang feared for his life. And we truly don't know what story is true.
And, we've heard this on, maybe it's our friends, the prosecutors, that there's always 3 sides to a story, one side, the other side,
his side,
and
her
the
side,
truth.
the truth. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
And it usually lands somewhere in the middle. So...
And I believe that this one will. So it's very interesting to go through all of the different details of everyone's version.
Yes.
Because I do think it lies in the middle.
Yeah, I do. Like hearing this now does make me. It does present something that I think would be compelling to a jury. Given that he's claiming that they were yelling racial slurs at him, which
and if they fired first.
I think it could have been true that they were yelling racial slurs at him because in our last episode, we already covered that there was a little bit of racial tension in the conversation that they had before the crime was committed.
Yes.
But I don't know if I buy that they shot at him first. I just don't know. Maybe I'll know more soon.
Well, we don't know. During the initial questioning, Vang actually did give 3 different versions of the story.
Okay.
So that's not a good sign.
No.
And I'm not sure how they all differed from each other. But it clearly just, in that itself, it wasn't enough consistency for the police to think that he was telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
When a journalist from the Chicago Tribune called to get Vang's side of the story, he then gave it a 4th version of events.
Okay.
So that's interesting. One thing that I do know is that one of the versions that he gave, which I believe potentially was the first one, was that it was actually Terry Willers who committed all of the murders using Vang's gun. He said he took the gun out of Vang's hands. He was wearing gloves. And he lined everyone up in line and shot him and then gave the gun back to Vang.
Okay. That's, like, I mean, that is sure...
I don't think there's a sense of truth in that in any way, shape, or form.
I was just about to say, you sure have spun a yarn there, Vang.
Yeah. So I do think he then changed the other versions to be a little more accurate to the real series of events. But still, he claimed that Willers shot first and that Vang was defending himself. That's something that I don't think ever changed.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So the trial was pretty controversial, and a trial of this magnitude in northern Wisconsin are very rare.
Mm-hmm.
A jury was brought from Dane County, which is the county that holds the state capital, Madison, which is about 4 hours south.
Mm-hmm.
And it only took them 3 hours to pick the jury.
Wow.
Yeah. That's unbelievably fast.
That's very fast.
Yeah. So the jury was made out of all white people. And supporters of Vang were very upset about this. Vang's defense team wanted the trial moved. They were worried that with all of the history that we discussed in the last episode with the Walleye Wars, that no matter how well they presented their case, they would lose it just due to the recent historical racial bias in the area.
Right. And wait, how are we still in 2004-ish, correct?
2005 was the trial. So it happened very quick, because this happened November of 2004, and it was just about a year later, kind of like summer, fall of 2005.
How was this an all-white jury?
That's just how jury pick went.
Well, I guess they only took 3 hours, so that just surprises me that the entire jury was white. But I guess you're judged by a jury of your peers, so wherever they pick from.
But that was the argument. Those aren't Vang's peers.
Yeah, his peers. Yeah. Okay, I see the problems.
Yeah, so you can tell that, like, based on what you heard from the Walleye Wars in the last episode, that this area is just so racially charged. And there's no right answer at this point, I think, because no matter what, there are going to be unhappy people.
Because, Sam, you straighten me out. You might know this. Vang's team wanted this trial moved. But would they have been able to move this trial anywhere but the state of Wisconsin? Like, wouldn't the trial have to
Probably
happen
not.
in Wisconsin?
Yeah, I think it would have to happen in Wisconsin. But
Okay.
I think they would have probably pushed for going to Madison or maybe Milwaukee, somewhere further south, that has more of a diverse population than northern Wisconsin. Because northern Wisconsin, like, there obviously is a diverse population, but when you're talking about race and skin color, it's really white people and natives.
Right.
Like,
yeah. So I guess
beyond that.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, what their goal would be as far as moving it. Like, I wasn't ignorant of many things, and I wasn't sure if it would have been possible for them to even move this out of the state, because maybe at this point most of the people in the state had heard stuff about this. But regardless,
I know it was massive news by me, and we'll get into it a little bit later.
Yeah, regardless, the defense wasn't able to move it.
The news wasn't good. Yeah, no, they weren't. It still stayed. I believe the trial was in Hayward, which is close to Meteor. But Vang's defense team also wanted to have him evaluated to determine his sanity at the time of the crime. Vang said that he was hearing voices of an evil shaman, and he said that he would hear the voice when people would use racial slurs towards him and when he would get angry. He also gave examples of hearing the voice while he was driving his semi, and it would tell him that he should try to run other cars off the road. He was evaluated, and he was declared sane, so this was not an option for his defense team.
Okay. That's an interesting point. Again, go back and listen to the first one, first part of this episode, because he had that experience where he went to become a shaman, correct?
He traveled to Thailand.
Train yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
To train or become, and so now he's trying to pull that into his defense, but the court doesn't have it. Okay.
Yep, they declared that he was sane and that they could not use insanity as a defense mechanism. So prosecuting attorney Peggy Logenschlatter, I have to say that is such a Wisconsin name. Wisconsin is very German.
I was going to say
Logenschlatter.
That I was going to say, first of all, I know that this case is very close to home for you, but slow clap for Sam for if you guys could see the way that this last name is spelled. I would have had to say it
so long.
I would have had to say this name like 3 times and cut out 2 of them. And it's so German that it reminds me of my mom's maiden name. Because, my mother has she's a very German maiden name, and it is incredibly difficult to spell. And that rolled right off your tongue. It rolled right off your tongue.
I'm not joking when I say this was big news. This was, this dominated the news.
Do you know, right, because by now we're at 2005, and Sam, we're not that far apart in age. You would have been in high school, right?
I was 15, yeah.
Okay, so close to high school, so you probably remember a lot of this.
Yeah, I think I was a sophomore in high school when the trial was happening. Yeah, I would have been a sophomore. I would have been turning 16 that fall.
Oh, okay.
Because my birthday's a handful of days after the shooting. My birthday's the 28th of November, so it literally happened on the 21st of November. But Peggy Logenschlatter, she came up with an explanation that does make a whole lot of sense. And this was her reason for wanting to prosecute Vang to the fullest extent of the law. She said that she saw a trend in Vang blaming everyone else for his violence. While driving the semi, he wanted to drive others off the road. He held a gun to his wife when she invited men, aka his friends, over for dinner, and she exposed his infidelity. He then nearly choked his second wife to death after she gambled money that he left on the dresser. She's just pulling out all of these examples in him of him getting angry and overreacting.
She's got a good prosecution there. That's, I mean, the history is there. The pattern is there. I understand where she's going with that logic.
During the trial, one of the survivors, Lauren Hesbeck, testified saying that Vang was the first to shoot. And Vang says that Terry Willers was the first to shoot. So it just turned into a he said battle between the two of them. And all they really had here were first-person accounts. One thing that's a little crazy to me is neither the prosecution nor the defense did any sort of ballistics testing to see if they could determine who shot first.
What? I just put the microphone directly. I just put the microphone directly on my mouth to say,
yeah.
What?
It's believed it would be because it would be truly detrimental to whoever was proven to shot first. And I honestly think both sides were worried about the honesty of everyone involved. I think that they kind of knew that neither side of these stories were actually the truth.
Right.
And what's very interesting about either side not supporting this part of the investigation is that investigators never found any shell casings from Terry Willers' gun, even though Hesbeck admitted to shooting the gun. So it makes me just wonder how well the scene was investigated as a whole.
Yeah.
Did they look for a slug? Like, I know that could be incredibly hard to find, but you never know. He could have shot a tree. It could have been right on the scene right there. Easy to find.
Yeah, or a casing.
But not even a casing? Yeah.
Yeah. Like if he had...
So that's really weird to me.
Yeah. That's very strange.
And it makes me wonder, too. I have no clue about the remaining people in the hunting party. This was a 15-person hunting party. That means that there are 7 people back at that cabin.
Yeah.
Did they get to the scene first? I don't know. I have no answers to any of that.
Yeah.
But it raises a lot of questions. Why there's no casing, why both sides made the decision not to, especially the hunting party.
Yeah. It just seems like it would be beneficial to both parties to figure this out. But I think just what you said, both parties are worried about what the truth is should it come out.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but that's what it sounds like.
Well, Hesbeck admitted on the stand that Bob Corrado had an issue specifically with Hmong hunters and that they were trespassing on his land. So that makes me wonder a few things. How many times has this happened? How many times did he catch the trespassers? Were they always Hmong trespassers?
Mm-hmm.
He didn't live on this land. There was a cabin on it, but he lived in Rice Lake, which is about 30 miles away. So how often could this have happened?
Right. I was gonna, this has been something that's stuck in my head since episode 1 in this 2-parter, that Cato did immediately say something about Hmong hunters when he first interacted with Vang. So,
he did. And that's again, it kind of fits into all these questions that I don't have answers to.
Exactly. How many times could this have happened? Why would you have this specific issue with with this specific type of hunter, like, wouldn't you be mad at all the hunters that trespassed on your land?
Well, it is actually a known issue that Hmong hunters have actually discussed themselves, admitted to, and trespassing on private land. But it isn't just to trespass and break the law. It's a difference in cultures. Apparently, this just isn't an issue in Laos, and Hmong hunters transitioning to hunting in the States have overseen that or forgotten that, and it has been known that Hmong hunters will go on private property. And this is coming from people who are Hmong hunters themselves. They acknowledge that this is a gap in some people's knowledge.
Right. Because, I mean, obviously, yeah, it's just another example of the culture shock of moving somewhere from your own country where before it wasn't an issue, but now all of a sudden, you know, it needs to be permitted and it needs to be overseen, and it was never an issue before.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that was mentioned by a local hunter from the area around Meteor and Rice Lake, who has lived in the area for decades, he said that for a long time, people just didn't really care if you were on their property as long as you didn't really abuse that privilege. And it really wasn't until tourists started coming to hunt in the area more that areas like Meteor were starting to have an issue with this. And the area around Meteor was frequently tourists from Minnesota. So there kind of just became this bias against Minnesota. And it's like, oh, you're here to hunt. You're probably going to be a problem. And I can understand that. Not like understand it as like, oh, yeah, I totally understand that Minnesota is going to be a problem. But there was a term that Willers used, which is, quote unquote, a mud duck, while radioing back to the cabin.
And that doesn't sound
good. This was during yeah, exactly. And this was like the first initial encounter. This is when he was radioing back to like make sure that no one else was in the tree, and that once he realized that it was Vang and that Vang was Hmong, he also then called him a Hmong asshole. I've never heard the term mud duck before, but it is considered to be offensive.
It sounds offensive.
Please know that when I'm saying this, it is in context of quoting this case. But the term specifically is supposed to refer to hunters from Minnesota who visit and hunt in western Wisconsin. So while I haven't heard this term before, I fully believe it exists based on my personal experience living in northern Wisconsin. There was a term that I often heard growing up, and technically I'm considered one, and it is a fib, a.k.a. a fucking Illinois bitch. Yeah, that is a very commonly used term.
You're going to have to turn down the audio on this.
You cut out for me.
I laughed so hard at Illinois, a fib, a fucking Illinois bitch.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's very, very well known term up north, and it is very widely used, and it's because there's so many different areas of Wisconsin that people from Illinois vacation in to experience the Northwoods, that it drives the locals nuts, and it just created this bias towards anyone from Illinois, and most specifically Chicago. And I ended up living there long enough, and my family still lives there, that despite being from Illinois, we've gained respect from the locals just by the basics of respecting them, and constantly being kind to them. But it is a term that is so often used for tourists that it's hard to go a day without hearing it during tourist season.
Yeah, and when Sam took me there, I visited. We saw just all around the area, and in Wisconsin, if I'm not wrong, Sam, you can correct me, as many, many lakes. And all of these lakes have these $1 million homes with the lakefront view that are probably bought up by these people from Chicago to come and cool their heels for a while in the summer.
My grandmother had a summer home. That's how we moved. We moved into her summer home when we first got there.
So that makes a lot of sense to me, that like the locals would have like a term for it. Because there were just so many, like, looking around, just multi-million-dollar homes that I imagine people resided in only part of the time, and that would make you feel a little differently about them.
More than anything, they come up during very specific times of the year, so you know when it's tourist season, but also because they're not from there, they don't act like locals. They don't do the same things locals do. They don't talk the same way as the locals do. And that makes them angry.
No.
And like, honestly, that's where it comes from. It's just like, you're not local. You're not from here. So I'm going to hold a grudge regardless if you could be the most amazing person in the world. It's just, it's that immediate bias that they judge somebody and immediately say, no, I don't like you.
Yeah. Which I can say from my experience going to northern Wisconsin as an out-of-stater, I had a lovely time and met nothing but lovely people.
I brought you up during tourist season, so you gotta meet all the tourists.
So I was technically a fib, but I was still treated very kindly, and
they won't say it to your face. That's
I'm sure once I left the store, they were like, she had no idea where she was going.
Oh yeah, I worked in those retail stores along like the main strip of downtown where all the tourists go. It can be rough. I did that for many, many, many years, and I felt like I was one of the few people that would like want to engage with people from Illinois, because I could always have that, like, hey, where you from? I know the area. I grew up down in the suburbs. Like, I had that connection that a lot of people just weren't even willing to try.
A lot of and this tourist sentiment, I kind of get my best friend lives in Florida. So she knows something about tourist season, because as soon as the weather turns here in Chicago, they all migrate to Florida. And my best friend has just told me it is so challenging to get the basics done during tourist season.
It really is.
Just to get your basic stuff done.
Needing to go, like, we were lucky we had a Walmart in my hometown. And just having to go to Walmart to pick up like shampoo and conditioner is a nightmare. And there's no such thing. Like, obviously, I didn't live there during the era of Lyft and Uber and DoorDash and all of those. That still doesn't exist up there, though. To this day, in 2023, they don't have that. Like, that's how these towns are still operating. And it's not I'm sure if people are doing it during the summer, it would make a huge profit. But that's kind of the allure of the town at the same time. So it's just, it's a different life up there. And like, I don't want to be sitting there and like bashing my hometown, because I really love where I grew up. I get very excited to go back. I got very excited to bring you with me last fall. But
I had so much fun.
I'd be lying if it didn't have its issues.
And
issues exist.
And y'all just heard me tell the story of Danny Green a little bit ago. That's my hometown, you know? So it stuff's happening all over the place.
Yeah, and we're talking about things in a lot of general terms as well. And like, I can tell you, there's so many people that I grew up with that are truly amazing people who not dealing with these racist issues from the walleye wars, and the people who don't hold those generational biases in either direction and have this love for each other and respect for each other, that exists. It absolutely exists up there. But unfortunately, there is another side of it, and they are polar opposites.
Yeah.
And in a small town, you just see it more. So with all of that, I can really understand that being openly referred to as a quote-unquote mud duck and a quote-unquote Hmong asshole could so easily be so incredibly offensive to somebody, especially somebody who has been racially profiled their whole life. If you remember in the last episode, we were talking about how Vang, his father, helped block the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and they were eventually granted political asylum to come to the States, but then they were treated terribly because there was misunderstood racism against the Hmong people. And just having that mentality of, my family's helping you and you granted us privileges to come into your country, and then you're terrible to us when we get here. Like, he this was from the beginning for him that he experienced this racial profiling.
Wow. And I can't imagine openly, like, just jumping to slurs like that when you've only just found somebody trespassing on your property.
Exactly. Like, it's just,
not that
brings it to this escalation so fast.
Exactly. I was going to say, not that it justifies any of what happened. It doesn't. But immediately leading with this does, just as you said, escalate things to, it takes it to a different place. It's less of a conversation and more of a confrontation.
During Vang's testimony, he said that the slurs were much worse than the ones that I just mentioned. I will not say them. If you want to find out, they are out there for you to see. But Willers and Hesbeck did testify that once Bob Corrado arrived, that it was a very one-sided conversation. And it included a fair bit of profanity with many racial slurs in Vang's direction. And according to people who knew Bob Corrado, he was kind of known as a hothead and that he had a reputation for being a loudmouth.
Ooh.
So things are falling into place very differently than we kind of came to the conclusion of in the last episode, where we don't really know what's true here because both sides kind of make sense, but both sides are equally as awful. And unfortunately, both sides still ended in 6 people dying and 2 people being injured.
Yeah. And again, nothing justifies that in the horror that it, unleashed on this community. But I understand what his defense is doing here. In trying to bring this forward. And because it kind of, the defense wants you to, I'm not a lawyer, y'all, I don't know. But the defense wants you essentially to put yourself in the shoes of their client. And what would you do? And what I would do if somebody immediately came at me hurling Irish slurs, which whatever. But if they came at me hurling profanity and hurling insults, I and many people do not respond well to people raising their voice to me because I was raised and you're not going to, who do you think you're talking to? You're not going to talk to me like that.
Right.
So, but being a loudmouth and a hothead doesn't mean that anything they're saying is true.
It also doesn't mean that you deserve to be murdered for it.
No. Yeah, and so we don't really know that any of this was said. Oh, we do have a confirmation of at least a couple racial slurs as he first saw him because he said it on the radio.
Yeah, and people aren't denying that there were racial slurs, but they're denying the severity of them. But it's well-known fact through this testimony that, yes, racial slurs were used towards Vang. So a quote from a retired reporter, Ed Calhoun, in Meat Eater article said that it came down to two strong personalities, one bully and the other homicidal. He also said, I came away from the trial not liking Corrado. He was full of himself and with all of his friends around, even though the other guy had a loaded rifle. He was so into his bullying and being the big guy that he didn't expect that Vang, who was 5'4" tall, was capable of doing. His actions didn't justify 6 murders, but he behaved really badly. Yeah. I think that's a fantastic way of putting it. I think it's showing that both sides have issues here.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to describe what happened here into this, what brought us to this crime.
Yeah, Vang killed 6 people.
Yeah, I mean, if we recall, correct me if I'm wrong, it was a sharpshooter he was qualified as? Yeah. So
with the National Guard, he was a certified sharpshooter.
So,
and if you remember, when he first started the shooting, what Willers said is he got down on one knee and took off the scope of his rifle.
Yeah. Wow.
I think that's something that's a really big kind of point out, is removing your scope, because you have intentions if you're removing your scope. For close shooting. Your scope is for long distance. Yeah. They were 20 yards apart. Yeah. They were like 20 or 40. I don't quite remember, but not far apart.
Right.
There is a documentary on this case called Open Season. And I will send this to you, Kelly. It's on YouTube. It'll be in the show notes, but Kelly, you need to watch it. It's only an hour long, so it's a very easy documentary to get through. But Paul DeMaine said that people really believe the incident was waiting to happen because there had been so many other racial incidents before.
Oh.
And he's referring to Bob Corrado in this situation.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
So we already know that there is a very recent history when it comes to racial conflict in the area about fishing. So it's entirely possible that Vang's story of events were true and that he was threatened due to his ethnicity. But Vang also has a history of violence. And as you just mentioned, he was a sharpshooter in the National Guard. Like, you're really playing with two things here that are never going to work well together.
No. I know that they said like he had a history of being a loudmouth and a bully, and gosh, I just wish they had just let him turn and go, because if you listen to part one,
to me.
If you listen to part one, Vang did try to leave the property at least once, Sam, maybe twice.
He tried multiple
to leave.
times.
Yeah.
And he was physically stopped by people standing in his way, or he was followed. Like, he made an attempt. He apologized. I personally do believe it was an accident. I wish that
this could have turned out another way.
Agreed. Like, it makes me so sad. And we talked about this a little bit when we recorded Danny Green, but we kind of had this call out of people like to stick with people that they understand. And I believe there was a good bit of that within Danny Green between the Irish and the Italians. They were both two groups of people who understood their own personal communities, and they didn't like the other one. And I think that's a lot of our issues here as well. We have our natives who are receiving rights different from the rest of the population. These rights have a reason that they were given to them, but the rest of the population, who is a very, very, very large majority white, don't understand it, and then they feel left out. So they get angry instead of acknowledging that, well, look at the history. Look at what we've taken away from natives. These treaties were put in place to have them try to keep some bit of their culture alive.
Right. And
that's not what happened.
Yeah, and not to keep talking about our Danny Green episode, but it's just, you're right, with the Italian American population and the Irish American population at that time, it's such a shame that instead of coming together as all recent immigrants, they couldn't find common ground. And I wish that in this scenario, there had been maybe common ground of like, oh, well, we're all hunters. We all get lost sometimes. You know, like I wish that they had just let him leave.
I completely agree. And watching that open season documentary, they basically say as much. They interview a lot of Hmong hunters in that documentary. Well, I have a quote from one a little later on here. But they just talk about their love of hunting. And I can tell you, growing up there, and I have some personal stories we're going to get to in a little bit when it comes to kind of my life witnessing hunting and its importance to the community. But it's life. Like, it truly, it's no joke when I say it's to feed your family, because most families don't buy meat in the grocery store. It's like, that it could be such a great bond to have that. And I'm not going to get into them, but I know natives who that first time hunting is a rite of passage. It's typically a boy and his grandmother is the one to take him out hunting.
Oh.
And that is a rite of passage for you to become a man.
Yeah, I can see how that would be.
And it's beautiful.
Very
like, it's a tradition.
Culturally important. Yeah, and rites of passage, you know, and just hearing that hunting is so much a part of their culture, you know.
Exactly. And you're right. It's such a perfect common ground that if we could just get over skin color,
right,
then we're fine. Like, that's what it is. It's getting over the skin color. But there wasn't any sort of physical altercation before the shooting started. Joey Corrado did block the way for Vang as he was trying to leave peacefully. But Vang said that he truly feared for his life. With multiple statements supporting Vang's account of events with the beyond excessive racial slurs, along with the accidental trespassing, then, while making an attempt to leave, being followed, and then accosted by a group of 6 hunters, I can understand Vang being scared. I can't understand him shooting 8 people multiple times. No. Also, while 7 of those people are unarmed.
Yes, that is so important. Unarmed people.
And we don't, like, Vang did not know that the last 2 victims who came to the scene, Jessica Willers and Adam Lasky, he didn't know they didn't bring a gun with them. Other than Vang's rifle, the only other gun on the scene belonged to Terry Willers, who he shot first.
Yeah. And it kind of, I don't know, you know, typically when we read these cases and things build and things escalate. They follow a certain trajectory. And this one just seems like it went from 0 to 60. Like, they did block his path from leaving, but that is I would expect like fisticuffs at that point.
Right.
Like, I would not expect all of a sudden for it to jump to gun violence.
And Terry Willers, his testimony was that they were on the four-wheelers and actually driving away when Vang dropped a knee and took off his scope.
You said that they were driving away and they were, I can understand him being afraid that because, like, you'll hear in part 1, I thought that it was a gang of 5 people who were going to do something to Vang, because I mean he was in a position that you don't want to find yourself in with just you and 5 angry. Yeah, with just you and 5 people who are extremely angry at you.
And you're in the middle of the woods with no one else around. Yeah.
And you're
terrifying.
Lost. Yeah.
But it's still, the outcome doesn't justify that fear.
Right. Like, you being scared didn't make you take off your orange fluorescent vest and turn it to camo so you could make sure you could shoot someone in the back. I'm standing firm on what I said the first time. I do think he's a coward. And I don't think that it was because, maybe part of it was because he was afraid, but I think a lot of it is because he was angry. And he had never before. We've seen a pattern, and he hasn't executed anything yet as far as this pattern, but it seems like he was a lot more angry than he was scared.
Oh, it gets worse. So Vang did take the stand, even though he was advised against it.
Sure he was. I bet.
Well, Vang did say that he was not the first to shoot. He did say that if I didn't shoot him, he would have shot me, while referring to the first shot he took towards the only person with a gun in the group, Terry Willers. Another thing the defense had to try to explain was the fact that 4 of the victims were shot in the back. So you're right on with that. Vang did say on the stand that he shot 2 of the victims in the back because they were disrespectful to him. Quote unquote, disrespectful to him. And I just have to say, you're not helping your case. Like, come on, man.
No,
like, that.
Dude. That's a bad thing to say on the stand. Why would you? I mean,
like, go ahead, say it, but awful.
Yeah, you can say it. Yeah, you can say it, but I hope you enjoy jail. I'm sure his defense team was like, oh, good
I
heavens.
Can't even imagine.
How do we get this man off the stand within the next 20 seconds?
Exactly. During a conversation with a reporter, Vang actually said that multiple victims, quote unquote, deserved to die for a variety of reasons, all relating to the confrontation that involved insulting his race. This interview was played in court.
Oh, wow. That's a statement that you don't want to make to a reporter.
Nope.
Why would you say that if you're trying to stay out of prison?
Yeah. So like really all that could happen is defense team just did anything that they could to control the narrative. But the interview was played in court. There's nothing that they could really do after those statements were made.
No. Nope.
The only thing that really potentially benefited him in this whole trial was that the testing was never done to prove who shot first.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we don't know that, but the testing wasn't done to confirm anything, so that's something that's kind of in his benefit.
Right.
And apparently, Hespeck had told his wife that Willers did shoot first, but he denied that he said that on the stand. So again, that's a hearsay, he said statement. Like,
I'm just blown away that they didn't do ballistics because
me too. I think honestly, it was more of the prosecution being worried that maybe they did shoot first.
They did shoot first, yeah. Yeah, because
I do think that's a possibility. I think it could have even been a shot into the sky to, like, give a
warning shot.
Yeah. Like, it could have been that, but I think the prosecution didn't push it because they felt like that was a good possibility. That's only my personal opinion.
Yeah.
But I just don't see why else the prosecution so specifically would not push for that testing.
Right. Because they were probably like, that's not going to have any benefit to us. So.
Exactly. If they find out that he shot first, then yes, it's self-defense. Like,
right,
there's still an argument for the crimes because there's still crimes, but
right.
Like,
right, but your sentencing is totally transformed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So during other testimony, it was determined that Jessica Willers and Alan Lasky, the two hunters who arrived last on the scene and that were shot in the back as they drove past Vang while he was hiding in the bushes, they didn't have a gun on them. So it confirms the only gun on the scene when authorities arrived was Terry Willers' gun. Again, there's some weird stuff here, not finding the shell casings or a slug from that gun when it's been testified that one shot was fired.
Yes.
But everyone back at the cabin said that no one else brought any guns with them. Again, I don't know if anyone went to the scene before authorities got there and could have grabbed anything, but I think I feel like that's just not smart to do. And I think that's something where it's like they had to stumble on the scene and be like, oh, I know what happened. They got in a fight and they lost. I don't think people would think that coming to a scene like that.
No.
So I don't know. There's something weird with the shell casing, but I do think that the remaining people in the cabin didn't really interfere with the scene. I think that's too much.
I would tend to agree with you. Like, if I'm sure it was a crime scene at some point, and I'm sure there was a detective there at some point, and if that detective didn't find a slug or a shell casing, what would you going down there do, you know?
Right. Well, and you also have to think about it. These detectives are not used to crimes like this.
Yes, you said that.
Yes, they've been trained, but they're not used to things like this happening. That has to be very overwhelming as an investigator to walk into a scene like that in small town Meteor, Wisconsin.
Didn't you say Meteor?
You have to understand that.
Didn't you say Meteor is like a town of 200 people?
Yeah. Yeah, it's less than 200 people. So I'm sure they had to bring in investigators from out of town and different areas and stuff because they probably didn't have a detective in Meteor.
And to have 6 people out of an only 200-person community murdered, that's significant.
Technically, they're from a bigger town about 30 miles away, but it's still, like, even a bigger town, that's a huge number of people. Like,
and to process a crime,
so many people.
To process a crime scene like that with so much going on, yeah.
So, September 26th, 2005, Chai Sua Vang was convicted of 6 counts of first-degree intentional homicide and 2 counts of attempted homicide. Each count was 70 years. So he is clearly going to spend the rest of his life in prison with no option of parole.
Mm.
He did try to file an appeal. It was immediately denied.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2007, he said that the judge should have suppressed the comments that he made to the reporter, but that appeal was also denied.
Yeah, I bet it was. Also, dude, it's bad for you as far as appeals go. If you took the stand in your defense and you admitted the stuff you admitted to the court, you're not going to have a lot of luck with appeals because you've already stood in front of a jury of your peers and they've already found you guilty.
Exactly.
So
we've discussed this a lot, but in an area that has already had a lot of racial tension, this only made things worse. Instead of the natives, there was a new subject for the racism: the Hmongs. They changed their slogan from the Walleye Wars to "Save a deer, kill a Hmong." They painted this on their tailgates, on their trucks. And remember, this is the 2000s. Less than 20 years ago.
That's wild. That's wild. Especially since I can't imagine, I don't know the statistics, but how many Hmong people could have been there? Like,
well, Minnesota was
it an immigration
pretty big
hub for
immigration area. Yes.
Oh, okay.
But still.
Okay, yes, still, but it does make more sense to me now that there are like more people there. I thought like there could, possibly only be a really small population. But
no, there's a good number in Minnesota. I think there was a good number in Milwaukee as well, but
right.
Still,
but
this
why
is a lot.
Yeah, why you would want to put a sticker on your bumper that says you want to kill somebody is beyond me.
It wasn't just a sticker on their bumper; it was painted across the whole tailgate. Like if you watch that open season documentary, you'll see them.
Mm-hmm. Oh my god.
And the thing is with a lot of this too, the survivors and their families, they were really trying to stop this. Mm-hmm. You'll see an interview with some of the people who are direct relatives of the victims. Mm-hmm. And they really didn't want this racism to go on like this. And I give them a whole lot of credit for that.
Yeah.
Because they easily could have just blamed him for everything.
Right.
Even he's at fault. Obviously, he's the one who pulled the trigger and chose to do that. But it's not his culture that chose him to do that. It is not his race that chose him to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say that's quite admirable on the family's part to say like this isn't okay. Like just because our family members can never come back, but this isn't okay to do to a group of people because of it. Because when these people are painting this on their bumpers or saying this stuff, they think like, oh yeah, well, I'm standing with the victims and I'm, doing what they want, when, as you've just said, that this family did not want this.
Well, that's what was so interesting about the reporting. And I talk about it very shortly here, so I'll touch more on it there, because I have a really fantastic quote from the open season documentary, which came out in, I believe, in 2010 or 2011. So this came out a handful of years after everything. Mm-hmm. But I feel like this kind of sums up this part of the conversation so well. And it says, Vang is an individual and he made choices of what he thought was best for him at the time. He has to live with that choice. And it's sad because I have to live with that choice too, because I am Hmong. And this was said by Chino Lo, who was interviewed for the documentary. He is an avid hunter. And I think this is a really fantastic way putting this racism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He had to deal with it. It was something that he was forced to deal with that he had nothing to do with. He made it very clear that, like, he's the type of hunter, he's not a sport hunter. You know, there's those people who hunt just because they want to get a big point buck deer to put on their mantle. He hunts for his food, and that's all he'll hunt for. He doesn't do any sort of sport game hunting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and he's having to deal with this.
Yeah, it and he puts it so eloquently. Like, he made that choice, and it's sad that he, the hunter, now has to live with it just because he's Monk. Like,
and it makes you think of, like, Home of the Free and Innocent Until Proven Guilty. And you're right. Chino Lo did nothing wrong, but he's not considered in Home of the Free. He's not free because of actions of somebody else. And
he's always
immediately assumed as guilty, even though it's innocent until proven guilty, because of somebody else.
Yeah, and he's going to be looked down upon for something that every culture, every ethnicity, every race, murders abound. And it really, really is a shame that this whole Hmong community now in the area has to live with Vang's choices.
And that's the thing for, like, that's such a great way of putting it for so many different situations, not just this one. Because as I mentioned earlier, like I was saying, I do love my hometown, and I don't want it to sound like I am just saying that everyone I know there is racist and everyone I know acts like this. And that's not true. And I think that's a really important thing to call out. And we can just say that in literally, I think, any episode that we've covered that has anything to do with some sort of bias or race. And I think that's just really important to continually remember. And I fully believe Vang's conviction is correct.
Yeah.
I believe that it is a mixture of the two stories, but I do believe he made the choice to murder people. He shot him in the back. He shot them multiple times. He took off the scope of his gun. He made that choice. It was not the right choice.
Yeah.
Regardless of who shot first. If Terry Willers did shoot first, Vang is a marksman, and he could have probably fired a shot that would have scared him without hurting anybody.
Right. And even if Terry Willers took a shot at you, it doesn't make it okay to return fire on the entire party of people.
Exactly. And
it just doesn't.
What I remember from the news is quite mind-blowing to me. All that was reported was that a Hmong man came upon a group of hunters and massacred them.
Wow.
That was it.
Wow.
I called my mom and my sister to kind of ask them their memory of the case, because my sister, she's 3 years older than me, so I think she was just in college at that point. And I just asked him, do you remember the hunter mass shooting from 2004? That's all I asked them. And they both immediately responded like, yeah, I remember it was a Hmong man chased down a group of hunters.
Wow.
And, like, that's all that we knew. So we were truly under this impression that it was this man that went crazy and stumbled upon a group of hunters and just killed them all. And that was it.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is a perfect example of how the news can just skew your perspective of the facts. And that's when you see the people coming out with their save a deer, kill a Hmong tailgate, is because they are being told by the news that a Hmong man went crazy and just killed people.
Right, chased people down. Yeah. Yeah. When, like, none of the news reports mentioned at all that, like, he was lost.
Exactly. That he was accosted, that he was literally stopped from trying to leave.
Outnumbered.
Yeah.
And he doesn't know, the thing is, again, we've said it endless times, like, nothing makes it okay. But he doesn't know if he's outgunned at this point, too. He knows he's outmanned, but there are 5 people in front of him right now, and he doesn't know that they don't all have guns.
Well,
so he could have been outgunned
I think
as well.
It's fair to say he has an assumption, because rifles are big.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Like,
that's
yes,
true.
They could have a handgun on them. That's entirely possible. I know many people who carry both, but they don't have rifles.
Okay.
I know the people that I know, they would like carry a handgun if they needed to like finish their kill close up. So if you find that deer and it's collapsed, and to literally put it out of its suffering at that point, they have a handgun. So like that's entirely possible. But they didn't have rifles.
But unlikely. You guys will y'all will understand as we go through this podcast that I have very little knowledge of guns and how they operate. And usually when I research, my husband Shay helps me a lot, and Sam helps me a lot, because I just
you're learning everything I know about guns in these episodes.
Yeah, I just don't have the background. So I was like, I don't know, maybe he was scared because they all could have had like handguns, and like I'm just unaware that it's not common to carry both when hunting. I don't.
Yeah, it just kind of depends on the person. I think you're not really supposed to be carrying the handgun, which is why a lot of people don't. I could be wrong. Laws have changed a whole lot since I lived up there, and I never was a hunter, but I don't think it's actually legal to shoot a deer with a handgun. But I don't know if there's like certain circumstances where it's like, instead of a very high powered rifle from a foot away, I don't know. But regardless, there's a point there that they could have been carrying other guns. We don't know. But still, the end result doesn't justify shooting 8 people multiple times and killing 6 of them.
Right. And like, I can only imagine like we discussed the crime a lot in the first episode, and the crime is egregious. I agree with you that the verdict is correct. I agree with you that it's not okay that this racial bias existed. However, when you hear the stories of how some of these victims were murdered, it is truly horrifying. Like there were victims that were murdered who were able to look him in the eye, and that
Lauren Hesbeck literally hearing the click of the gun when he ran out of bullets. Like, my God, that's horrifying.
Yes.
And like when I called my family and I'm asking them this, I told them the facts that I had started to read online and some of the details. And we believed for nearly 20 years that this was a case of a madman, because that's what our news wanted us to believe. Like, they were as amazed as I was. And they're very anxious for this episode to come out, because they're like, we don't want to hear you say everything yet. Like, we want to hear it on your episode. But they're like, we need to know.
Wow. Yeah. And it's crazy how it's just, something's reported one way, and then maybe it doesn't stay in the news that long, but whatever was reported stays in the lexicon of the community way longer than the news report.
And I think regardless of which side you're on here, because depending on whose story you believe is the most accurate, I can understand you being on both sides, at least to an extent. But I think in the end, we can all say that it is absolutely terrible that 6 people died while 2 others were wounded. And please know that none of how we're putting this together today is to victim blame.
No.
That outcome should have never, ever happened. But we're trying to understand how we got to that outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to discuss the facts of the racial slurs and the conversations that happened ahead of time to understand why Vang made that choice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's an important thing to call out.
Yeah.
And there's no argument that Vang did the wrong thing.
There isn't an argument. No. And there isn't an argument that any of them deserved any of this. They were at least a couple were young people with their whole lives ahead of them that he just stripped away. 2 of them were related, so a family has just been shattered.
4 of them are related. Well, two groups. So Terry Withers and his daughter Jessica, and then Rob Corrado and his son Joey.
Right. So 2 families have just been shattered, and that doesn't even factor in the people who were murdered, who were just taken from their community. Like, some of these guys might not have even said anything to Vang.
Right.
They might have just been riding in the ATV, you know?
We know that
I don't know.
Jessica Willers and Alan Lassick didn't. They drove past
sure
him
didn't.
and shot him in the back.
Yeah.
So, like, obviously, we believe that these victims were very unjustly murdered. But we also can't help but think that if he wasn't provoked with these racial comments and he wasn't chased down by 4-wheelers, would this have happened? Very possibly. Yeah, it could have happened. And he clearly had a history of violence. Mm-hmm. And if this incident didn't happen in this moment, I do really believe it would have happened with somebody else, another group of people, somebody else who crossed that line for him.
I think I'm kind of in agreement with you on that, just based on the history that we heard that he has with threatening violence, particularly against spouses. I would think if this didn't happen in this case, it could have easily happened with one of his wives.
Exactly. And I tried to find some research when it came to violent gun crime amongst hunters in rural areas. Mm-hmm. Because there's a big difference of how you treat a gun in a place like Chicago versus how you treat a gun in northern Wisconsin as a hunter. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Basically, every study I found said that nearly all gun crime in these rural hunting areas is essentially non-existent. Mm-hmm. I also called a friend of mine who is a medical examiner, and I just wanted her thoughts on this. Mm-hmm. And she's a medical examiner in a rural area in northern Wisconsin. So her insight is very important in what's happening here and her experiences. Mm-hmm. And she actually recently took part in doing a study where she told me that in Vilas County, Oneida County, and Forest County, which are 3 counties that are just a little bit east of where this all happened, there have been less than 10 violent gun deaths in the last 10 years between the 3 counties.
Wow.
That doesn't include accidents, but purposeful gun deaths, less than 10 in 10 years. We're lucky if we get less than 10 in a day here in Chicago.
Yes, absolutely. That's mad. 10 violent deaths in the last 10 years.
Yes.
That's nuts.
And people's relationship with guns are just so different in rural areas where hunting is common. During my conversation with my friend, we were just talking about people's views on guns and how they protect them and treat them. And the majority of people who we know who are hunters keep their guns locked in safes or vaults.
Mm-hmm.
They perform routine maintenance on them. And if they didn't do that, then that means that they might not bring home the meat that they need during hunting season to feed their family for the year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's the difference. And that's why the attitude around it is just so different.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so different than having a gun in a city.
And she gave me a pretty good analogy for this, is people treat their guns how people protect and lock up medications if you had a baby.
Mm-hmm.
Like you need to take all those protocols. You need to make sure that they can't get their hands on them.
Mm-hmm.
And incidents happen, unfortunately. I know multiple people who have died from hunting incidents. When I was in the 7th grade, a classmate of mine shot himself on accident. He was cleaning his gun, and I remember that being the first funeral I've gone to.
God, that's horrible.
That happens.
Oh my God. I mean...
But I will tell you, like, incidents like that shake the whole community, that it causes everyone to, like, tighten the reins a little bit and become more protective and make sure that things like that don't repeat itself.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish that... I wish that more... I was talking with Shay about this the other day, my husband. I wish more people had... You know, you hear people say when they put their life jacket on, like, oh, well, you have to have respect for the sea. Or you're getting ready to go backpacking and you bring all your water because you have to have respect for the terrain, you know? Like, I just wish people would say, like, would give guns that same weight. Like, you have to respect the violence that this piece of machinery can do. And if you don't...
They do up there.
Exactly, they do. But
like,
what I'm saying is I wish that attitude were more prevalent.
Yeah, I agree. And what's really kind of crazy about a lot of this, too, you get your hunting license at 12.
That was bonkers.
When I was in grade school, kids would be out in their tree stand at sunrise with their parents waiting for a deer. Then they would have to leave to take them to school. And that's if their parents didn't just pull them out of school for the hunting season in 9 days.
Uh-huh. Oh, okay. That's normal?
If they did go to school, that's very normal. Like once hunting season comes around, like teachers know they have to do really light curriculums because they know half their students will be there.
And we've learned enough through this episode that it's important enough because these people are trying to feed their families through the winter.
Exactly.
So it would be important enough to pull your child from school if they were old enough to successfully handle an armament.
Well, you even pull them out younger. They just don't have a gun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they can be spotters.
They don't get that gun until they have their license. Mm-hmm. But and this is something that when I tell people this, it truly blows their minds. But if those kids did go to school, they could walk through the front door of the school, their middle school, drop their rifle off in the front office so they can pick it up after class so they can go hunting until sunset.
I was just going to let that breathe there with no comment because I only recently...
That was normal. You walk in the front door.
When I visited Sam's family, we were talking and it came up and it blew me away that you could check your gun at the school door and it was not weird.
Not at all. And my mom, she worked the front office at my grade school. And there was this one point when a student was doing show and tell and he wanted to bring in his compound bow.
Oh, God.
And this was a couple years after Columbine. This is Columbine was what, 99, 98, something like that? This
Around
was like
then,
the first couple years of 2000 that this happened. I was in middle school.
Oh my God.
And she let him, well, the school let him bring the weapon in. And my mom had to escort him down the hallway to his classroom because the rule was that they couldn't walk with any type of weapon in the hallway.
Okay. All right.
And so once they got to the classroom, she handed him the bow and he went in for show and tell. Like, that's
Okay.
life. That's what things are like up there. And like, we were taught archery in gym class. I learned how to shoot a bow at 10 years old in gym class.
That's really cool, actually.
It was really fun. We felt so cool as little kids shooting a bow and arrow in the gym.
This will come out eventually as we do this true crime podcast, and I might as well do it now while we're talking about bow and arrows. I'd love to learn how to shoot a bow and arrow, but I don't have the upper body strength. I've heard it's quite difficult, but I also have never shot a gun.
It depends on the bow and its design. We should do one of those fun shooting range things at the Ren Fair or something.
Archery, I'd absolutely be willing to do.
Yeah, let's do that one day because that exists around here.
Yeah, archery.
I don't care about shooting a gun. That's not interest to me, but I would do archery.
I've never shot a gun. I have not even a BB gun, not even a paintball gun, and I have no intention to do so.
Yeah, I have no desire for that.
Because of what I just said just a little bit ago, that I have a healthy respect for how dangerous those weapons are. And I don't want a weapon that dangerous in my own hands. I don't want that. I do understand people who use them, who even collect them. I understand. It's just, personally, for me, I can't shoot a gun. I can't.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. And that kind of just brings us to our conclusion here. But one thing I did really kind of want to mention, because this was a difficult couple of episodes. We're walking a fine line here. And it kind of just brought me back to the first review that we ever received for our podcast. And Kelly, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it was someone who gave us a 1-star review after listening to the Sherry and Wounded Foot episode. And if you haven't listened, that episode is about a Native woman whose life could have potentially have been saved if people showed her a basic level of care. And then after she died, her case was barely investigated. Mm-hmm. This was a clear case of injustice and racism, and she was Native. And we pointed out that this was something that we felt like was very unfair and that she didn't deserve that sort of treatment. Mm-hmm. And the reviewer said that we were railing on Columbus Day, that we're racist against white people, and urged people not to listen to us. Whoever you are, if you're for some reason choosing to still listen to us, please understand that racism is an issue that, unfortunately, since white people make up the majority of our race as America, as a combined race, unfortunately, white people are the main offender because of that. According to usfacts.org in 2020, white people made up 59.3% of America. The next largest racial population was Hispanic and Latino at 18.9%. We need to point out that just looking at that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
So just based on the fact that our country is made up of 59.3% of white people, they are statistically more likely to be the largest population of people who are also racist. I hope it's a tiny percentage. That's what I would prefer to see. But I can't rely on that information. And I think that this episode walks the line in multiple directions here. And I think it's just really important to bring up our beliefs in that in any direction, racism isn't okay.
Yeah, I would just like to share a little something. The Sherry and Wounded Foot case was my episode, and I cared about it a lot. I still care about it a lot, about justice for Sherry and justice for her brother who was not taken, he was murdered in the exact same town. Yeah, you should listen to it. And Sam, feel free to cut this part if you would like, but I am just going to share a quote. It is, "At this point, I have a request for our fans. If any of you in any way hate homosexuals, people of a different color, or women, please do us this one favor. Leave us the F alone. Don't come to our shows and don't buy our records." Kurt Cobain, frontman of Nirvana.
I absolutely will not be cutting that because I wholeheartedly agree. And you knew I wouldn't cut that, but I absolutely will not.
Yeah, you're welcome to if you want to, but you know,
I think that's something that is very, very important to us. And I debated bringing up this review. It sucked. That sucked to read as our first review ever. But at the same time, I'm also very, very proud of our choice to fight against racism. And unfortunately, this case has a lot to do with race. But there's the potential that it never would have happened if racism wasn't a part of it. But it did. And because of the way that I grew up hearing about it, I felt the need that we really kind of need to show what modern day racism is like that isn't often being discussed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fang spent his whole life with people treating him differently and terribly due to his race. If Willers and Hesbeck are telling the truth, and while Vang is exaggerating the racism involved in this case, I do believe that Vang minimally perceived the encounter as racist. And as the saying goes, perception is reality. That does not justify killing 6 people and injuring 2 others. But it's disappointing to me that I'm learning this 19 years too late.
Yeah.
And I think the outcome of the trial is correct. Like, that's right. He deserves to be in prison for the rest of his life. But it feels like the truth was kind of hidden from us because we were amongst this area that is frequently known as being racist. So they told people what they wanted to hear more than what was actually the truth.
And I would recommend, I recommended this on the Sherry and Wounded Foot episode, but I'll recommend it again. There is an amazing book called Lies My Teacher Told Me, where a lot of history is covered that I for certain missed in my history class. And it is a great book to take a look at and just to help challenge the perceptions that you've held through like rote learning in school.
Yeah, because there's a lot like, and this is something that's interesting to me too. I've asked a lot of people in my life if they've ever heard of the Walleye Wars because it made big news. It made national news when it was happening, and we learned about it in school. I learned about it in my curriculum while I was in school, but I've never met anyone else who has ever learned about it. And I find that very interesting.
I had no idea.
Yeah, and it's just like there's so many things. It's like I bet you there's things like this in Ohio that you never learned about. That there's no way I would have ever learned about. Like every place has some sort of history that it's probably not proud of that it's not talking about.
Right.
And back a little bit to this person who wrote the review, they also wrote on Twitter that we need to keep politics out of true crime. And while we really don't want to get too political with our show, these crimes often involve politics. They are often political. This case is political. And we're here to discuss true crime. If we cut out all of the cases that include any sort of politics, we'll only be doing a small portion of our job as true crime podcasters. And I don't want to do that. I want to cover everything because it's important.
I agree. And I would argue that, not argue with you, argue with the reviewer. I would argue that all crime is political because
I think all crime, or a very, very large majority of crime, is political.
Yeah. So Sam's right here. If we took all the politics out of true crime, then we would probably end up covering almost nothing. It's just almost inherently political because of the justice system.
Exactly.
Yeah, once the crime is committed, the justice system enters the picture, and you want to accurately portray that part of the story as well. So that's why I said, the sweeping statement that all crime is political. It may not be, 100% of it might not be, but the cases that go before our judicial system are certainly political.
Yeah, and also remember, politics really comes down to opinions. And it's okay to have a differing opinion as somebody else. That you can be on the opposite sides of whatever, if it's the political spectrum, if it is the religious spectrum, anything like that. And you can still show respect for each other. And I think that is something that we can often forget. And it could be on such an incredibly basic level. If you just didn't like something that person did, you don't like their outfit, you might not want to be friends with them. Well, that's not necessarily showing respect because it's their opinion. They liked that outfit. They chose it. Like, it's such on a tiny level, but it can be so massive as well. And I think it's really important to be respectful to each other.
Yeah, I think it's, and I think when it comes to differences in things as large and prevalent as politics and racism, I think it's even more important to be willing to listen to people who have different experiences than you with
absolutely
politics or with religion or with anything else. And like I wish could have happened here and in many other cases, try to build a relationship with that person where you can conduct yourselves respectfully with them.
Exactly.
Even if you disagree on issues that you think are fundamental, I understand, but try and give yourself the ease of interaction by creating a mutual respect. I would say.
Exactly. And talking about race is not an easy conversation. But as we've said, it's incredibly important for us to be respectful. And Kelly, you and I know that we will never fully understand the level of racism that the rest of our 40.7% of our country has surely experienced throughout their lives. And throughout their generations. You and I just can't understand.
No.
But we want to do our best to tread lightly and not harm. Yeah, and we want to tread lightly and not risk harming anyone, but we also do want to take a stand and show our support. So we have to talk about it. If we don't, what's the benefit?
Who are we helping? That's the thing.
Exactly.
More than anything, it's my intention, and I know Sam's intention, in covering these cases. Our intention is always coming from a place of wanting to help and wanting to amplify stories and wanting to lift up stories, and that's where it's coming from. We just want to help, and we want to see these things not happen to our neighbors.
Exactly. And we want to hear from you. We want to learn from you so that if we have any opportunity to help, we can. There's a lot that we don't know. And that's why I wanted to talk about this case so specifically, because I had personal experience in this area, and I've experienced a lot of this racism firsthand through witnessing it. And then I experienced the news not reporting it and kind of, quote unquote, giving us what we want to hear. But this is important to me to bring up because it's just, this was something that was so mind-blowing to us when it happened, and it became so much more mind-blowing the moment I started to do any sort of research on it. But we also really do want to thank our listeners who have stuck through this conversation. It's not an easy one. It's never going to be an easy one. But it is necessary. And I also want to thank our listeners who have also made the decision to give us a 5-star review for our show so that it can be shared and most likely seen by other people. You guys have been amazing because we have our 1-star review, but every other review we have gotten to this point has been a 5-star review.
So lovely.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And yeah, just from closing for me, I think that I have kind of spoken my piece a lot during this episode. And I think I'll just leave it with...
That's a long one.
And I'll just leave it with...
There's a lot to say.
Yeah, there's a lot to say. I'll just leave it with that I wish community and similarity and understanding could have prevailed here. But if it did, we wouldn't be sharing this story. So we have to share it for the victims.
Have to share it for the victims. Have to share it for the story. I think that this is a fantastic example of you what you see in the media and what you see discussed is not always the truth. And understand that. And it sometimes is going to take a lot more digging to understand what really happened in a given situation. That's why we go through trials. That's why we go through that sort of stuff.
Right.
But yeah, welcome to the crazy one that was my teen years all over the news.
Wow. That's wild.
I was kind of hoping you would have just heard little bits and pieces and kind of had the same reaction as my mom and my sister, because that's all the news really ever said. But
no, well, the
fact that you hadn't even heard of it at all is even crazier.
I was going to say, it's even more compelling. I grew up in Ohio. I was not that far away. It's still the Midwest, and I had never heard about any of this.
Yeah, this was very big news. But we want to thank you all for listening to Have You Heard About This Case? If you're looking for more of us, you can find us on Instagram at Have You Heard About This Case Pod. You can find us on Twitter at HYHATC Pod. Or you can email us at haveyouheardaboutThisCase@gmail.com. And we would love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you, and we'll talk to you later.
Have a good night. Bye.